The fault. We believe that all men are created equal.
To the magnificent mosaic that is America.
From radio beacon to radio beacon. I have a dream. Change has come to America.
Believe it.
Knock, knock. Who's there?
It's a figment of your imagination.
Randi Rhodes Show.
Turn up your mind.
There are undocumented children being held alone in detention, even as close as Homestead, Florida, right here, less than 30 miles from where we are tonight. Fathers and mothers and children are dying while trying to enter the United States of America. We saw that image today that broke our hearts, and they had names. Oscar Martinez and his 23-month-old daughter Valeria died trying to cross the river to ask for asylum in this country. Last month, more than 130,000 migrants were apprehended at the southern border. Secretary Castro, if you were president today, hoy, what would you specifically do?
Thank you very much, Jose. I'm very proud that in April I became the first candidate to put forward a comprehensive immigration plan. And we saw those images. Watching that image of Oscar and his daughter Valeria is heartbreaking. It should also piss us all off. If I were president today, and it should spur us to action, if I were president today, I would sign an executive order that would get rid of Trump's zero-tolerance policy, the Remain in Mexico policy, and the metering policy.
Hello.
This metering policy is basically what prompted Oscar and Valeria to make that risky swim across the river. They have been playing games with people who are coming and trying to seek asylum at our ports of entry. Oscar and Valeria went to a port of entry, and then they were denied the ability to make an asylum claim. So they got frustrated, and they tried to cross the river, and they died because of that.
On day one, sorry.
On day one, I would do that executive order that would address metering, and then I would follow that up in my first 100 days with immigration reform that would honor asylum claims, that would put undocumented immigrants, as long as they haven't committed a serious crime, on a pathway to citizenship, and that would go to the root cause of the issue, which is we need a Marshall Plan for Honduras and Guatemala and El Salvador, so that people can find safety and opportunity at home instead of coming to the United States to seek it.
Thank you. I just want to say, I think Julian Castro did our whole show last night in 60 seconds or 90 seconds, whatever he was. That was pretty freaking concise and accurate, and it's exactly what I've been telling you, that they are playing games with these people, the metering thing. Remember yesterday I told you, what if you're in the deli line and you get number 127, you look up and you see they're serving number 20, and you ask, how many people, do you serve, in an hour? And they tell you we serve 40 people a week. Would you stay in the line? You see what I mean? They're playing games. And Julian Castro, I'll tell you something. Let me say this right out of the gate. I would have voted for anybody at that debate last night 1,000-fold over Donald Trump. And I'm including the sound guy in that. Seriously, dude. I mean, I would have voted for Lester Holt. I would have voted for, Rachel. Maybe not Chuck Todd. But anybody that was at that debate last night, okay, they were a billion times better. And I just think when people actually tuned in and they didn't see, screaming and yelling and belittling and name calling, they went, oh, this is boring. Yeah, well, it's not boring if you give a damn about human life, basic human rights, healthcare, the climate. It was the first time in, I don't know, two years or more that I heard any issue thoughtfully discussed, whether people agreed on Medicare for all or we should do a public option for. It didn't matter to me. You know what mattered to me? That I heard policy, that I heard real discussion, that I saw emotion, I saw compassion. I thought Julian Castro, when when Diaz-Balart asked him about this horror show that has been created at the border by keep them in Mexico and all. Oh, and by the way, right before the debate, I tweeted out, it was breaking news, right before the debate, just before it got underway. the U.S. asylum officers, guys who work for our government, guys who work for literally Donald Trump, they petitioned the court last night, and they used a federal appeals court, and they asked the court to please block the Trump administration from continuing his immigration policies, especially the Remain in Mexico policy, because they're being directed to implement this, and it's threatening the lives of children and women and people who are supposed to be in their care. And they actually wrote in their brief to the court, they wrote an amicus brief, which is a friend of the court brief. They said that it fundamentally is contrary to the moral fabric of our nation. They argued that asylum officers are duty-bound to protect vulnerable asylum seekers from persecution. This is 2,500 federal workers, including the asylum officers. They wrote a 37-paged friend of the court brief to the Ninth Circuit. Now, why? Because the Ninth Circuit has not yet decided whether or not Trump's policy endangers lives, human lives, and violates basic human rights that are available to people in America, whether they're citizens or not. They're humans. And that's what America is, right? So they wrote this 37-page brief, and they said, please make him stop. You have to deal with the root cause of all this. You have to do, and Julian Castro is the only person last night that brought up Central America and the Northern Triangle, and the fact that it's run by the freaking elite mafia, and that the United States has been propping up these guys for 20 years now or more, and that we invaded Salvador, and, we did all this, chose sides in a civil war, allowed for the killing of 200,000 people that just sort of kind of stopped in 1996. I mean, it's just that we devastated these countries, and that we need a Marshall Plan for our neighbors right there in Central America. And if we would invest, and what does Trump do? He pulls out aid. He says no more aid to these countries. Did you think that was going to increase or decrease the amount of migration? Let me tell you something. This is so sick and sad. So right before the debate, the entire asylum division wrote to the court, and you know who their boss is. Their boss is Ken Cuccinelli, the former Virginia Attorney General, that hardliner dude that sits on CNN all the time screaming about immigrants. That's who's in charge. And so they decide, he's the acting director, because we don't have anybody in charge of Border Patrol. We don't have anybody in charge of Homeland Security. We don't have anybody in charge of U.S. citizenship and immigration services. Everybody is in acting. Everybody is temporary. Everybody is, and so the Ninth Circuit had allowed the policy to continue pending its decision on whether or not it was in violation of federal law. So that's why they wrote this amicus brief to the court, and they said, please, just insert yourself already. Would you please? Because this is, people are dying. And you know what? The Nuremberg defense doesn't work. We can't say we were just following Ken Cuccinelli's orders. It's not going to work. And I'm sure a lot of these guys and women have post-traumatic stress disorder, because they're doing this cruel thing, and I'm sure some of them are decent. Not a lot of them, though, I got to say. In another matter, in another court case, you have, you have the children, this has to do with the environment in Clint, Texas, at Border Patrol's facilities. The lawyers who were mandated by the court to do the inspections, we played you there. They never saw anything like this. This was horrendous. So they went and interviewed the kids, and the kids' interviews are now being made public. And oh my God, it'll rip your guts out. Now, this was a good discussion last night, finally.
All things Randi at RandiRhodes.com.
Go for launch.
Speaking truth to power, the Randi Rhodes Show.
Secretary Castro, if you were president today, what would you specifically do?
Thank you very much, Jose. I'm very proud that in April I became the first candidate to put forward a comprehensive immigration plan. And we saw those images watching that image of Oscar and his daughter Valeria is heartbreaking. It should also piss us all off. The reason that they're separating these little children from their families is that they're using Section 1325 of that act, which criminalizes coming across the border, to incarcerate the parents and then separate them. Some of us on this stage have called to end that section, to terminate it. Some, like Congressman O'Rourke, have not. And I want to challenge all of the candidates to do that. I just think it's a mistake, Bethel. I think it's a mistake. And I think that if you truly want to change the system, then we got to repeal that section. If not, then it might as well be the same policy. You said recently that the reason you didn't want to repeal Section 1325 was because you were concerned about human trafficking and drug trafficking. But let me tell you what. Section 18, Title 18 of the U.S. Code, Title 21, and Title 22 already cover human trafficking and drug trafficking. I think that you should do your homework on this issue. If you did your homework on this issue, you would know that we should repeal this section.
This is for all the American citizens out there who feel you're falling behind, who feel the American dream's not working for you. The immigrants didn't do that to you. The big corporations did that to you. The 1% did that to you.
I gotta tell you, it was awesome. Every time somebody said something intelligent, like I said, whether you agree with them or you didn't agree with them, it was like, I can't believe we have a dimwit like Trump for president. But they were like real people. All right, listen, I'll admit, we got a pushy loudmouth from New York in the White House right now, and it's not working out. But Bill de Blasio, who everybody told you to hate, actually, stood out last night a little bit. I mean, he has a lot of accomplishments to talk about. $15 minimum wage in New York, New York City. He talked about the fact that people have health care in New York City. Everybody's covered in New York City. He's talked about everybody's got pre-K free in New York City. He talked about a lot of things that he's done. So I love his policy stances. It's just maybe he should use his inner voice. Because he was very disruptive. And I will tell you, I was listening to the post-debate commentary, and a lot of the people on the NBC side, they found him obnoxious. He's obnoxious. I don't like him. He's too boisterous. Maybe that's kind of what you need. I don't know. I will say, like I said, I would vote for anybody. Now, Julian Castro brought up this really good point, though. How many of you, I wonder how many of you are geeky? How many of you are really dorks? It's probably just me. Who looked up Section 1325? Who looked it up? Right. I did. But I already knew what it was because we were sitting there and we were watching it. And, Howard's a freaking lawyer. And I had to tell him, did you know that 1325 was inserted into the federal law in 1929 by a white segregationist, white supremacist, neo-Confederate holdover from the Civil War era? Did you know that? Yeah, that's really true. And what it does, it criminalized. We never had the law that said that people that come over from Mexico or cross our borders without the proper, that they're criminals. It's always been a civil, violation. What they did was in 1929, you had this white supremacist who said, he was a segregationist, and if the Constitution said that he couldn't segregate people, then screw the Constitution. That's the nature of this man. Okay, so anyway, he was from South Carolina. Of course he was, and the specter of him, what he did was he made crossing the border a misdemeanor. Not it's not a felony, but he made it a misdemeanor. And Trump has used that standing of being a misdemeanor in criminal law as the reason why he can lock people up. So Julian Castro is exactly right that Trump has perverted the perverted and took a white segregation. I mean, this has got to be a Stephen Miller workshop that he took, that Trump was, subject to. But that's really what it was. I mean, there's a whole book about it. It's called City of Inmates. Seriously. Conquest, Rebellion, and the Rise of Human Caging. And it goes through our history from 1771 and 1965. Anyway, The man's name, his name was Coleman Livingston. I don't know if it's Blease. I've never heard anybody say his name. So I don't know if it's Blease or Belize or whatever. But he was born in 1868 in the foothills of South Carolina. And his voters called him Coley. And even the white supremacists of the day, the ones that crafted Jim Crow laws, the ones that rescinded the promise of 40 acres and a mule, the real whites, segregationists. This is the Southern Democrat Party before we had a political realignment after the Civil Rights Act. And the segregationists and the white supremacists, they moved over to the Republican Party because we had a complete realignment in this country of the two parties. Okay, so that happened after the Civil Rights Act, but these are the Southern Democrats that Joe Biden, was talking about, how he could work with these people. And remember, Joe Biden's going to have to answer for that tonight because, of course, he wasn't on the stage last night. And by the way, the people that he was talking about, the white supremacists that he worked with, the segregationists that he worked with, he said, and I hope somebody's sharp enough to point this out, that he was working with them on the Voting Rights Act, which, by the way, came up today in the Supreme Court. We got two rulings. One was horrible and the other one was less horrible, but predictable. But Biden's going to have to answer for why he thought these people were, real people, why they had any integrity at all. Why would he work with them? Why would he, and he was not working on the Voting Rights Act. He was working on a piece of legislation, Biden's legislation, regarding anti-busing. He was against busing. He was against one of the court-ordered remedies for segregation. That's what he was working with these white supremacists on. Anyway, this guy, Blease, defended violence against people that he called racially inferior. He said, a band of white men have done exactly right for whipping blacks, saying here's a quote from him. The morals and the mode of living between colored people are not up to the standard adopted and lived up to by white people. He defended lynching. He had no legal concerns with vigilante justice. He said, quote, whenever the Constitution comes between me and the virtue of a white woman of the South, I say to hell with the Constitution. That's who wrote Section 1325 of the Federal Immigration Act. He despised courts. He loved the rich. He had to resign. He actually worked his way up to be governor of South Carolina, and then he had to resign. But before he resigned, he pardoned 1,000 state prisoners, among them a man convicted of murdering his wife and all of his former clients that he defended in court as a white supremacist lawyer.
Connect. To speak to Randi, call 561-270-3844. 561-270-3844.
All right, everybody. Tim Ryan had a moment.
If you go to Guantanamo Bay, there are terrorists that are held that get better health care than those kids that have tried to cross the border in the United States. That needs to stop. And I think the president should immediately ask doctors and nurses to go immediately down to the border and start taking care of these kids. What kind of country are we running here where we have a president of the United States who's so focused on hate and fear and division? And what has happened now, the end result, is now we've got kids literally laying in their own snot with 3-week-old diapers that haven't been changed. We've got to tell this president that is not a sign of strength, Mr. President. That is a sign of weakness.
It absolutely is a sign of weakness. So that was a good moment from Tim Ryan. It was the only good moment from Tim Ryan, but it was a moment from Tim Ryan. So I thought I would point out that Tim Ryan was actually on the stage. Now, I agree with you. It's probably really hard for you to, figure out who the white guys on the fringe ends of the stage were, but that's okay. Because they don't stand a chance. But, listen, I looked at some of the people that were on the stage last night. And, look, Beto could be, I don't know, Secretary of Agriculture. Put him in charge of, instead of Border Patrol, CBP, put him in charge of what's that? CDB, CG? What is that oil that you pot smokers like? CBD. Yeah, but it doesn't have CT. He was stoned. I'm so sorry, but Beto was like high. He really was. Make him Secretary of Ganja. Inslee belongs at the EPA. He should be there's some good agency people that were on that stage. And, I have this really weird feeling that that's what they're, actually out there doing, is getting their names known and their positions known and their issues known, so that when they become your Secretary of Agriculture or your Secretary of Marijuana or your Secretary of, at EPA or your Secretary of Energy or your Secretary, I think, tonight we'll see Hickenlooper. You'll see he's got a lot of plans for small business and stuff. He should be, in charge of the Small Business Administration. Do you know what I'm saying? But not all of them are presidential. Not all of them are intellectual. Not all of them were, up for the task. I will say they hardly mentioned Trump, which was great, because it can't all be about, what we know is a bumbling, fumbling, chaos president. It can't all be about him. I loved listening to real discussions, with real solutions to real problems that we really have. I loved the conversation on healthcare. I loved listening to, listen, Amy Klobuchar, she presented herself and her positions very effectively. It's just that it's a little hard to shake the image of her eating salad with a comb. People say she's mean to her staff and stuff. I don't think she's mean. I think she's kind of like me. I think she's a perfectionist. I think she needs the right information at the right time. And if you get it wrong, I think she'll get in your face. I really do. I think that's what she's about, is getting it right and being thoughtful. Okay? Ooh, that's a crime in the United States now, right? And apparently the most Google searched Democrat on the stage last night was Tulsi Gabbard, which is great news for Tulsi Gabbard and bad news for Tulsi Gabbard. Right? I mean, the first thing you see is, Hare Krishna. And then the second thing that you see is, she did not support the LGBT community at all. And now she's running for president. And she does, because she said she served in the military and she knows that they would kill for her and she would kill for them or something. I mean, all right, here you go.
It's not only the...
No, that was the winner. Sorry. It's called Meet Them. Which one? Which one is Meet Them? Meet Them. Anybody? He's not sure. Yeah, because it's not written that way. So, let's see. 12. Meet.
One of the first things you did after launching your campaign was to issue an apology to the LGBTQ community about your past stances and statements on gay rights. Why should voters in that community, or voters that care about this issue in general, trust you now?
Maybe many people in this country can relate to the fact that I grew up in a socially conservative home, held views when I was very young that I no longer hold today. I've served with LGBTQ service members, both in training and deployed downrange. I know that they would give their life for me, and I would give my life for them.
We do not talk enough about trans Americans, especially African American trans Americans, and the incredibly high rates of murder right now.
It's just like with gay marriage. When kids talk to their parents and their grandparents, they say, I don't understand why we can't put these sensible things in place. They listen. And if we get bested by a bunch of 17-year-olds, it's the best thing that ever happened.
Gun violence is a national health emergency in this country.
This president is literally every single day 10 minutes away from going to war, one tweet away from going to war, and I don't think we should conduct foreign policy in our bathrobe at 5 in the morning.
President Trump has alienated our allies and our friends and our alliances. He's diminished our standing in the world, and he's made us weaker as a country, less able to confront challenges, whether it's Iran or North Korea or Vladimir Putin in Russia.
The biggest threat to the security of the United States is Donald Trump, and there's no question.
Trump needs to get back into the Iran nuclear deal and swallow his pride. Put the American people first.
I'm proud to have been the first governor to stand up against Donald Trump's heinous Muslim ban.
And on January 20th, 2021, we'll say adios to Donald Trump.
I like that. I like that a lot. Anyway, Tulsi, I don't know. She's got a lot of skeletons in the closet, She's got probably got a bone room. Yeah, I don't know. You know who likes her? Like uber psycho talk show hosts that make stuff up. They love her. They just enjoy talking to her. Ex-wrestlers, ex-comedians, this kind of thing. They just love her because she's hot, she's very, very hot, and she's a surfer, and she's, exotic. And they've just fallen in love with her. They just, dig her. But I don't get a winning vibe from her. I get a sort of Vladimir Putin can do whatever he wants. There's video. If you guys follow me or Malcolm Nance on Twitter, Malcolm tweeted out one of her expressions of Trump did nothing wrong. The Mueller report showed that he did not collude. The Mueller report shows he didn't obstruct. Tulsi Gabbard is one of those. She is one of those people that just walks around the earth saying that Trump is fine. Trump didn't do anything wrong. The Russians didn't interfere in our elections. We don't need to do anything differently. And she's anti-war. But most Democrats are anti-war. And while they were having a real discussion last night about these issues of war and peace and, murder of transgendered African-American women and guns, people were Googling, and, I'm glad that you'll Google her. You should Google her. Go look her up. Poor Tulsi.
The Randi Rhodes Show is live on RandiRhodes.com and the free Progressive Voices app for Android and iOS. Visit the App Store or ProgressiveVoices.com now.
You have many plans: free college, free childcare, government health care, cancellation of student debt, new taxes, new regulations, the breakup of major corporations. But this comes at a time when 71% of Americans say the economy is doing well, including 60% of Democrats. What do you say to those who worry this kind of significant change could be risky to the economy?
So I think of it this way. Who is this economy really working for? It's doing great for a thinner and thinner slice at the top. It's doing great for giant drug companies. It's just not doing great for people who are trying to get a prescription filled. It's doing great for people who want to invest in private prisons, just not for the African Americans and Latinx whose families are torn apart, whose lives are destroyed, and whose communities are ruined. It's doing great for giant oil companies that want to drill everywhere, just not for the rest of us who are watching climate change bear down upon us. When you've got a government, when you've got an economy that does great for those with money and isn't doing great for everyone else, that is corruption, pure and simple. We need to call it out, we need to attack it head on, and we need to make structural change in our government, in our economy, and in our country.
She won. I mean, there's no question that Elizabeth Warren is the most thoughtful, most intellectual, most accessible. She's an Oklahoma girl. She's self-taught. She's self-educated. She is not part of the Washington establishment. She was a law professor. She, understood bankruptcy. She understood the scam against, African Americans. She understood the liar loans. She understood the whole Wall Street meltdown. She understood credit card ripoffs. She understood all of it. And she testified in front of the Senate. In fact, she testified in front of Joe Biden. And even Joe Biden, who was fighting her tooth and nail because he was representing the corporate interests at that time as a senator. And she actually went toe-to-toe with him. And he actually had to concede, oh, you're good. Oh, you're a good professor, like nice little girl. I mean, it was very condescending of him, the way he treated her because she was brilliant. And then Obama tasked her with, coming up with a solution for consumer ripoffs, for big bank ripoffs, for credit card ripoffs, for student loan ripoffs, for home lending ripoffs, the Countrywides of the world, and she came up with this, Consumer Protection Bureau. She couldn't get confirmed by Mitch McConnell's Senate to be the head of this Consumer Protection Bureau that she invented to protect us, the consumers, who are 70% of our gross domestic product. 70% of every penny that generates for America, that creates an economy for America, comes from us buying things. It's a consumer-driven economy. And she wanted to protect that base, that 70% of the American population that keeps our economy going, by making the rules of the road known and enforceable. Well, the Senate wouldn't confirm her. And after she had been to the Senate a few times, she said, you know what I'm going to do? I'll just run for the Senate. And she won. And that's how Elizabeth Warren came to be Senator Warren. Okay? And I tell you, there's something about her. She just doesn't worry about Donald Trump. You know, the post interviews were sort of better than the debate, only because the candidates had much more time to talk, about their ideas. So she showed up with Chris Matthews from Hardball. You know, he was doing the post-show interviews for MSNBC. And even he admitted, and, he's a tough guy. He's just really tough. And I think he likes Biden, I got to say, only because they come from similar backgrounds. They're of the same age, you know what I mean? But he had to give it to her.
It's not only the campaign contributions, it's how many times have their lobbyists been in to talk to the staffers? How many times have bought and paid
how do they
for
grease their way in? How do they grease their way in?
They grease their way in 40 ways. How about the revolving door?
Yeah.
You watch these guys. Did you read Jack Abramoff's book?
Oh.
You know what Jack Abramoff
I don't think I'd want to, but go ahead.
Oh, but you should. You need to
He's
learn
the guy that
from
represented the Indian tribes.
He's
exploited the hell out of them.
He is the guy who exploited everyone for money, and that was the whole point. You know what he used to talk about? He used to talk about how he would say to young staffers, when you're through being a staffer, come over to our shop.
Oh, God.
Because we really think you have promise. And he would say at that point, he no longer had to stay after him. They would.
I know how this works.
So look,
they come around with their tans and their expensive suits, and they talk to the staffers about all the vacations they've been on and the golf clubs they're in, and they say, if you work with me from the inside, I may give you a job later. You know how it works.
So here's the deal. I have the biggest anti-corruption plan since Watergate. Here's the bad news.
Okay.
We need the biggest anti-corruption plan since Watergate, but we can attack this head on. And if we do, everything else we need to work on in the economy, in climate change, on guns, we'll have
You're on a roll, Senator.
Not only is she on a roll, Chris, butter her ass, okay? She actually gets that at the root of every issue that we can't get solved is lobby money, donations, donor interests, law firms. She gets that it's all about the money. She understands where the corruption begins, how it goes into the congressional offices, into the senatorial offices, into the campaigns, from the law firms. She understands that there is no chance in getting any issue that we care about solved, even when 98% of the American people agree on, like, background checks, as long as the gun lobby is doling out millions of dollars in donations and sending their lobbyists to Capitol Hill to talk to the staffers, to talk to the legislative assistants who write the legislation. Because you don't really think your member is sitting there writing the law, do you? There's some kid fresh out of law school that's writing the freaking law, and the lobbyists will go and grease that kid by saying, hey, you want to come to our golf club, or you want to spend the weekend? We're going on a retreat, and we're going to go to Aspen, and we're going to ski, and it's all paid for. You want to come, but you got to work for me on the inside. And then, you know what? Anything happens to you, you come work for Greenberg Traurig, which is where Jack Abramoff worked. Or you come and you work for Kirkland and Ellis. Or you come and you work for, Dick Steen Shapiro. Or you come, right? This is how it, and until and unless you have an anti-corruption package aimed at the revolving door, where people go and they could be a staffer and then go to a lobby shop, or they could be a senator and then be a lobbyist, like Fat Denny Hastert did, or any of these people, unless and until you attack the actual corruption. And the only reason why there's wealth inequality is corruption. That's the only reason why. That's the only reason why. People with money spend their money on purchasing senators, their staff, purchasing legislation, getting the tax, loopholes written into the legislation as it's being written in real time. And unless and until you actually get that money out, Citizens United, all of that. The Supreme Court is so political. It's out of control. Today, they handed a big, big win to the Republicans who want to gerrymander. They said, this is so bizarre. Supreme Court today said that as the chief arbiter of what is and what is not within the constitutional democracy's laws, that they have no say and no place to decide anything about gerrymandering. Now, that is sick and twisted because the courts have always been the arbiter of what is and what isn't racially gerrymandered or racially discriminatory. But they decided to say the gerrymander was political in nature and separate it from the racial nature of the gerrymander. I mean, it was such a sick grab for the Republican Party. And then the other decision that the Supreme Court made today had to do with the citizenship question, which was also designed as a racial disincentive for people of green card holding status or DACA kids or work permits or TPS recipients, temporary permanent status, to not fill out the census because there's a citizenship question. They felt that this would be kind of like IBM identified all the Jews in Germany that way, by, doing inquiries. Anyway, so the Supreme Court said, well, you can't have a citizenship question on the census because it's, it actually favors white men. But the gerrymandering, that's not racial. Now, the reason why we got a favorable decision on the citizenship question is exactly what I've been explaining to you. This Thomas Hofeller dead guy, his daughter Stephanie Hofeller, there's new evidence. Courts know it, and trust me, the Supreme Court would have ruled that you can have a citizenship question on the census, except that they know that there's new evidence that's about to become very, very, very public. And so the 4 liberals got the support of John Roberts.
Mary had a little man. The fault.
We believe that all men are created equal.
To the magnificent mosaic that is America. From radio beacon to radio beacon. I have a dream today. Change has come to America.
Believe me.
Knock, knock. Who's there?
It's a figment of your imagination.
Randi Rhodes Show.
Turn up your mind.
This is the case involving partisan gerrymandering. This was a 5-4 decision written by the Chief Justice John Roberts, and it says that the courts have to stay out of these questions of whether maps are extremely partisan gerrymandering. Basically, the court's saying here that the courts have no role to play, and that means that all of these maps that challengers have said were partisan gerrymander, that politicians went too far in drawing these lines for strictly political gain. The court saying courts cannot rule on this, that this is strictly within the purview of Congress.
Listen, the court has erred, as they say. I got to tell you that this is a terrible, horrible partisan mistake that the court has made with regard to its role in deciding whether or not maps that look like, they look like an Etch-a-Sketch drawing are constitutional in their nature. This is bizarro world. I mean, this is such and it's a bipartisan issue because there were 2 states in question. One state was North Carolina, which gerrymandered in favor of the Republicans. So, for example, in North Carolina, only 53% of the people voted for a Republican, but they ended up with 7 of the 10 seats. You see what I mean? Because of the way the districts were drawn. So they dilute the votes of the Democrats. However, in Maryland, it was the exact opposite. in Maryland, the maps were drawn like an Etch-a-Sketch, crazy lines, to favor Democrats. And so the court had a perfect bipartisan example here of the terrifying and horrible, party manipulation through drawing of maps and gerrymandering. And this was a perfect time for them to make a decision that maps cannot be drawn for politically discriminatory reasons or racially discriminatory reasons. And instead, they punted, okay? Now, I will tell you that it was 5-4. 5-4. Welcome, Kavanaugh. Yeah, it was 5-4. And the Justice Eleanor Kagan wrote the dissent. I just want to read you a little bit of what she wrote because she's got all the really good words. All the really good words. And she wrote this: for the first time ever, this court refuses to remedy a constitutional violation because it thinks the task is beyond its judicial capabilities. And not just any constitutional violation. The partisan gerrymanders in these cases deprive citizens of the most fundamental of their constitutional rights, the rights to participate equally in the political process, to join with others to advance political beliefs, and to choose their political representatives. That's how she opened her dissent. You know, it's supposed to be one man, one vote, and it's not supposed to be, we'll choose for you before you even get to the ballot box. This is one of the most basic functions of the Constitution, one man, one vote. This is, equal justice under law, equal access. I mean, this is so basic. And that they refused and said, there's no role for us to play. Are you freaking kidding me? She said, partisan gerrymanders here debased and dishonored our democracy, turning upside down the core American idea that all governmental powers derive from the people. These gerrymanders enabled politicians to entrench themselves in office against voters' preferences. They promoted partisanship above respect for the popular will. They encourage a politics of polarization and dysfunction. And if left unchecked, gerrymanders like the ones here may irreparably damage our system of government, and checking them is not, and she emphasized the word not, beyond the courts. The majority's abdication comes just when courts across the country have coalesced around manageable judicial standards to resolve partisan gerrymandering claims. Those standards satisfy the majority's own benchmarks. They do not require, nor do they permit courts to rely on their own ideas of electoral fairness. And they limit courts to correcting only egregious gerrymanders, so judges do not become omnipresent players in the political process. But yes, the standards used here do allow, as well they should, judicial intervention in the worst of worst cases of the subversion of democracy. It causes blatant constitutional harm. In other words, they allow courts to undo partisan gerrymanders of the kind we face today from North Carolina and Maryland. In giving such gerrymanders a pass from judicial review, the majority has gone tragically wrong. This goes on for 10 pages, I think, maybe more. But, I mean, she's literally outraged. And she ticks off all of the, legal qualifications that give the court permission and indeed invite the court to make this decision. And yet we have the Supreme Court saying, We have no role to play in gerrymandering. We have no role to play.
This is the case involving partisan gerrymandering. This was a 5-4 decision written by the Chief Justice John Roberts, and it says that the courts have to stay out of these questions of whether maps are extremely partisan gerrymandering. Basically, the court saying here that the courts have no role to play, and that means that all of these maps that challengers have said were partisan gerrymandered, that politicians went too far in drawing these lines for strictly political gain. The court saying courts cannot rule on this, that this is strictly within the purview of Congress. So it's quite a stark ruling here, 5-4, all 5 conservative justices taking this stance that courts have no role to play here. The issue here is that the Chief Justice writes in this majority opinion that this is strictly a political question. That the
Oh my God, this is basic 1 man, 1 vote stuff. So now what we have is a Supreme Court that says the parties can choose for you. The parties can choose for you who's going to win before you even cast your vote. I mean, it's just so sick. It's just so amazing. But and then the other decision that we got would have gone the Republicans' way too. Would have gone for Donald Trump. Trust me. The adding of a citizenship question to the census, it would have gone for Donald Trump's position of yes, include it, except for the new evidence that was discovered by a young woman named Stephanie Hofeller, the daughter of Thomas Hofeller, who died. A North Carolina cartographer who drew before he died, these gerrymandered maps. That's what he did for a living. And the court also ruled that technology is so advanced now that you don't even need a guy like Thomas Hofeller to draw the maps. They can pinpoint exactly where to draw the lines to entrench power permanently in these districts just by, a software program. So, Thomas Hofeller's old-fashioned way of, rigging the system, it's not even in play anymore. But the new evidence is why they said, okay, no citizenship question.
All things Randi at RandiRhodes.com.
Go for launch.
Speaking truth to power, the Randi Rhodes Show.
The justices in this ruling saying, for right now at least, the Census Bureau cannot go forward with putting this citizenship question on the 2020 census. That doesn't mean it won't happen eventually, but for right now, as we face up against this July 1st printing deadline, the Supreme Court is saying, hold on, we need more explanation from the Commerce Department about why they want this question added, and we're going to send it back to the lower court. That's the Southern District of New York, the federal court in Manhattan. This is quite astonishing, really, because of this tight deadline that we're under. Today is June 27th, and the Census Bureau had said that it needed to start printing these questionnaires for the 2020 census by July 1st, within a matter of days. But the Supreme Court is saying here that it is within the Commerce Department's right to include a citizenship question under the enumeration clause of the Constitution, which is better known or otherwise known as the Census Clause, which lays out how the census will be conducted. It is within their power to add this question. However, they need to adequately explain it. And one of the key portions of this opinion here, it says we cannot ignore the disconnect between the decision made and the explanation given. And that really points to this question here as to whether or not there was improper political motivation. In the lower courts, we heard testimony, we saw documents. It was unclear as to how exactly this decision to add the citizenship question was reached. And then, of course, within the past few weeks, we've seen this other evidence be discovered and be presented at the lower courts. The Supreme Court that I've read so far doesn't exactly address that evidence, but it does raise some question here as to whether or not the Commerce Department, as to whether or not the Secretary, Wilbur Ross, was being completely truthful as to why they added this question.
Right, and that's the new evidence I'm talking about. Wilbur Ross, the Commerce Secretary, that man, that disgusting, sleazy, pasty man, that horrible guy who lied to Congress. said to Congress under oath that the reason they were adding a citizenship question was to protect the Voting Rights Act. Oh, please. And the real reason they wanted to add a citizenship question is because this dead man, Thomas Hofeller, had told the Trump administration and had told the Republican Party that adding a citizenship question would actually increase the participation by white males and would decrease the participation by brown people. And it was a great, great way to redraw the maps without including brown people. And he lied. And that's why there was a vote the other day. Remember, the Oversight Committee voted to hold Wilbur Ross in contempt of Congress because they were asserting executive privilege over this material. A lower court was able to see the material. They were able to see the thumb drives and the backups that Stephanie Hofeller, Thomas Hofeller's daughter, was able to find in her father's belongings after his death in North Carolina. And she gave it over to Common Cause. And, you know, these cases, the defendant is Common Cause. So she was able to give that information over. And even Justice Roberts wasn't able. Now, I say Clarence was fine with it. Kavanaugh was fine with it. Oh, screw the new evidence. We don't care. We don't care. But Roberts wrote, if judicial review is to be more than an empty ritual, it must demand something better than the explanation offered for the action taken in this case. Meaning, Wilbur Ross lied. He lied to Congress. He lied to the court. Everybody in this case has lied to the court. They have, not just perjured themselves, but they have also obstructed justice. They have hidden evidence from the court. And the court, believe me, was perfectly willing to include this question. They were perfectly willing to entrench Republican autocracy in this country by virtue of their Supreme Court being the last arbiter of constitutionality. They were willing to go there. They were willing to do it. But they couldn't because the lower court, and that's why I've been telling you about the story in little pieces and lots of segments about Thomas Hofeller, so that you would understand what they were trying to do to our democracy. And they didn't succeed on the citizenship question yet, but they did succeed on the issue of gerrymandering, which is one of the most heinous things that is done to people who want to vote. Now, the census is the allocation of money, the distribution of $880 billion of federal money to states, to localities, for hospitals, for roadways, for infrastructure repair, for all those things. And they just wanted an undercount. That's what they wanted. And it's also, it was also going to be used as a tool to identify places where there were white people and gerrymander them into districts that disfavored brown people. And that, the Supreme Court said, is fine. It's fine. Now, I'll tell you, Trump's over at the G20, not that anybody cares, but he tweeted that he wants the printing of the census delayed. He wants it delayed because he wants that citizenship question. Because they're undermining the election already. Already. We're about to have our second debate of the entire season, just number 2. So tonight's Biden, Buttigieg, Sanders, Kamala, Marianne Williamson, John Hickenlooper, Andrew Yang, Kirsten Gillibrand, Michael Bennet, and Eric Swalwell. Those are the 10 tonight. And before we even had our second debate with candidates that people don't even know yet, they're already trying to put the fix in. And the Supreme Court was willing to do it. They were willing to do it. Just Roberts had to give them, some sort of a cover because it is about to come out in the lower courts that Wilbur Ross perjured himself and Wilbur Ross covered up and obstructed evidence in this case. It's very sick, very sad. All right, Lorenzo in Illinois.
Hey, what's up, Randy? How are you?
How are you?
I'm good. Long time no talk to. Hey, question before we continue. Is it true that the freaking Everglades are on fire?
Yes.
That's like all water, isn't it? Or mostly water.
It's a swamp. It's got marshiness to it. You know, it's got things that can burn. It's marshy. It's sawgrass.
Yeah, but it's got tall grass, but I mean it's got like mostly water. So if the grass is in water, the grass should be moist, and how can moist grass catch on fire?
Yeah,
I'm just curious.
I know.
It makes no sense.
You would think that the water would prevent the sawgrass, but you know it is. It feels like 107 degrees here, so it's pretty dry.
Oh wow!
And it hasn't rained. It hasn't rained. First, like last week, remember every day you could hear the thunderstorms when we were doing the show. This week we've had no rain, and we've had temperatures like I've gotten into the car and it's been 107 degrees. So it's very, very dry. Very dry.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, wow. Sustainability is common sense as far as I'm concerned. But what I called about was the debates last night.
Did you like it?
I've been hearing a lot of. Yeah, I was impressed. I was really. The one thing I was telling, because I talked to friends about it, and I was telling them the one thing I was looking for wasn't per se, what they had to say. I was looking for their passion.
Passion, yeah. That's yes. Passion. They all had passion. I'll give them that.
Call in, connect. To speak to Randi, call 561-270-3844. 561-270-3844.
So the way I understand this is there is way too much consolidation now in giant industries in this country. That hurts workers, it hurts small businesses, it hurts independent farmers, it hurts our economy overall, and it helps constrict real innovation and growth in this economy. Now look, we've had the laws out there for a long time to be able to fight back. What's been missing is courage. Courage in Washington to take on the giants. That's part of the corruption in this system. It has been far too long that the monopolies have been making the campaign contributions, have been funding the super PACs, have been out there making sure that their influence is heard and felt in every single decision that gets made in Washington. Where I want to start this is I want to return government to the people, and that means calling out the names of the monopolies and saying I have the courage to go after them.
Corporations are people, my friend.
That's what she's talking about. And it's the whole system is ate up with this. The whole, from beginning to end, from the minute that you want to run for office to the second you're sworn in to the second you vote. Now, I just want to tell you that the Senate passed this hideous $4.6 billion infusion of cash into Trump's sick, psychotic immigration policy. $4.6 billion. The House yesterday passed its own version of this bill that had restrictions on where this money could go. It couldn't go to private prisons. It had to go to buying, like you need $4.6 billion to buy soap and toothpaste. Like you need $4.6 billion to buy a blanket. I mean, it was just so ridiculous. It was so stupid. So the House passed the same amount of money, but with restrictions on it. The Senate, of course, they were lobbied like crazy by these private prison companies, Core Civic and Geo Group, who have already gotten Okay, you want to know? This is so sick. Those two companies, Geo Group, it's in Boca Raton. It's here in Florida. $500 million they were given to take care of these kids. $500 million. Where is that money? Where is that money? Now we're going to send another $4.6 billion to this crazy. All right, so the House restricted the use of that money. The Senate didn't. And because, what's today, Thursday? They're on vacation now. Congress is closed now until after the 4th of July. Okay, they're on recess. And they won't be back. They're not coming back next week, and they won't. Maybe the week after they'll show up. Okay, so they had to get something done. Now, if you know that the Senate passed their bill, the House passed their bill. Well, that would mean they would have to go to a conference committee and work out the difference. But they didn't want to spend the time to do a thoughtful immigration bill that would actually benefit these kids and babies, literal babies. Okay. So the House got pressured by the Senate to pass the Senate version so they wouldn't have to go to a conference committee, and it just passed. So now we're going to hand Donald Trump, with no strings attached, another $4.6 billion so he could torture immigrants, so he can actually torture children. And, I got to tell you, some of these lawyers and some of these doctors, the doctors aren't mincing words. The doctors are saying that these conditions mimic torture chambers because the lights are left on all night, because they're sleeping on cold concrete, because it's freezing cold in there on purpose, because they're left in their dirty, soiled clothes, because babies are rotting in bacteria-infested onesies. They're not mincing words. They're saying this is torture. This is just, it's tantamount to a torture chamber. They're actually saying that. Now, the lawyers that represent the interests of the children in the United States that are in U.S. custody, they filed a temporary restraining order after their interviews of these kids, right? And I just got to show you what the kid said. This is a 15-year-old girl, quote, I started taking care of, and she named the baby, but they redacted the name of the baby. 5 years old this baby is. I started taking care of blank, age 5, in the icebox after they separated her from her father. I didn't know either of them before that. The baby was very upset. The workers did nothing to try and comfort her. I tried to comfort her, and she's been with me ever since. Baby sleeps on the mat with me on the concrete floor. We spend all day, every day in that room. There are no activities, only crying. So 17-year-old girl. 3 days ago, my baby soiled his clothes. I had no place to wash the clothes, so I couldn't put them back on my baby because when he went to the bathroom, his poop came out of his diaper all over his clothing. Since then, my baby, who is 3 months, has only been wearing a small little jacket made of t-shirt material. I have nothing else for my son to wear. I've been told they don't have any clothes here at this place. I just need my baby to be warm. I'm having to make sure I carry my baby super close to me to keep his little body warm. This is an 8-year-old boy. They took us away from our grandmother, and now we're all alone. They haven't given us to our mother. We've been here for a really long time. I have to take care of my little sister, and she is very sad because she misses mom and grandma very much. Oh, God. We sleep on a cement bench. There are 2 mats in the room, but the big kids sleep on the mats, so we sleep on the cement bench. 8-year-old. 12-year-old. I'm hungry here at Clint all the time. I'm so hungry. I've woken up in the middle of the night with hunger. Sometimes I wake up hungry at 4 a.m. Sometimes I wake up at other hours, but I'm too scared to ask the officials here for any more food, even though there isn't enough food here for me. 12. This girl doesn't know how old she is. She said the day we arrived, my baby became sick. She could not open her eyes. She had a fever. It got much worse during the day. I asked the guard for help, and he told me, just deal with it. I asked for help again. He ignored me. The third time I asked, I was crying because my baby was so much worse. I was so worried. And after 2 days, they took her to the doctor. This is a 16-year-old girl. We are in a metal cage with 20 other teenagers with babies. We have 1 mat. We need to share it with each other. It's very cold. Each of us got a Mylar blanket, but it's not enough to warm up. There are benches, but we can't sleep there. Sometimes it gets so crowded that we can't find a place to sleep, so they allow a few of us to sleep outside in a fenced area. 16-year-old boy. They told us we could only have 1 layer of clothing. They threw the rest of our clothes in the garbage. 12-year-old girl. At 3 a.m. the next day, officers told us that our grandmother would be taken away. My grandmother tried to show the officers a paper signed by my parents saying that my grandmother had been entrusted to take care of us. The officers rejected the paperwork, saying it had to be signed by a judge, and then they took my dear grandmother away. We have not seen her since. 16-year-old girl. We slept on mats on the floor. They gave us aluminum blankets. They took our baby's diapers, baby formula, all of our belongings. Our clothes were still wet. We were very, very cold. We got sick. I've been in the U.S. for 6 days. I have never been offered a shower. I have never been able to brush my teeth. There is no soap Our clothes are dirty. Our clothes have never been washed. 18-year-old girl. My baby got wet. I had to take his pants off 2 days ago. They will not give me pants for him. I cannot wash his pants. 4.6 billion more.
This is the Randi Rhodes Show. To speak with Randi, dial 561-270-3844. That's 561-270-3844.
But Angel Gabriel said he and his family had no other choice. He said they fled Honduras after being targeted by local police because of a complaint he had filed against them.
Una detención ilegal y abuso de autoridad. Luego de eso, pues, me los llevé a juicio, les gané. Me indemnizaron por una parte, pero 15 días después recibí el atentado en mi casa. Por eso pues, me vi obligado a salir y dejar todo atrás.
Like others we spoke to, they've come to claim asylum in the U.S. But the current administration has restricted the number of asylum seekers who can come through official ports of entry and be processed daily. In some places, it can take months to get through, and some people say they can't wait that long. Angel said he and his family had been in Mexico since January before deciding to make the treacherous trek across the river.
Me dediqué a mi trabajo, la profesión que yo sé de mi trabajo, todo lo que es construcción, soldadura, electricidad, etc. Gracias a mi trabajo pues logré sobrevivir con mi familia todo México durante estos 4 meses y semanas. Y bueno, hasta hoy porque ya no teníamos dinero como estar sobreviviendo ya. Sí. Como le digo, me siento agradecido que mi familia esté bien. Sí.
After several days at a Border Patrol holding facility, most families apprehended in the Del Rio sector are released here at a new volunteer-run shelter.
Por acá, señorita, pásale. Bienvenida.
Alan Ramon and other locals here address the family's basic needs and help with the next leg of their journey, joining relatives or friends in other parts of the U.S. while they await a hearing.
Buen día. Estoy aquí con Willy y su hijo. Estamos en la frontera ahorita, en un pueblo que se llama Del Río, Texas. Me está diciendo Willy que tiene que llegar a Atlanta.
These are just a handful of the hundreds of families who arrive at the southern border each day. And they are likely to keep coming, despite the administration's efforts to deter migration, as long as they feel it's riskier to stay at home than to cross the river.
Just the fact that they're doing this should make the credible fear adjudication a no-brainer. Okay, I don't know if you understood what he was saying there. What Willie was saying there was that he was falsely arrested in Honduras, okay? He was falsely arrested, and he brought a corruption case, okay? And he won. He won his case in court. That the authorities were abusing him, that the authorities were, arresting him for nothing. And he went to court and he won. And after he won, the police attacked his house and told him that they would kill him and his family, and that's why he had to leave. That's not credible fear. I mean, what are you going to wait for that stuff to happen here? This is so sad. It is so heartbreaking. So tonight, I want to hear what Joe Biden has to say about this. I want to hear, what, Marianne Williamson is going to talk about love, and how love should conquer all this and everything. But I tell you, the best answer so far that I've heard on this issue was Julian Castro, who said we need a Marshall Plan for Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador. And we owe it to them because we did this. We made those countries hell holes. We propped up agribusiness there. We propped up the fruit companies. We propped up AT&T. We propped, you name. Go watch The Godfather for Pete's sake. Everything that happened in Cuba, that was all mafia stuff. And the same damn thing happened in El Salvador and in Guatemala and in Honduras. Same damn thing. Don't you remember Noriega in Panama? He was our guy too. He was a CIA operative, okay? And then he played both sides, and finally they said, okay, we're going to take him out. That's what goes on in these countries. This is all mafia. This is all the elitists. This is all the big, wealthy, moneyed interests taking these people's land, taking their little coffee farm. The police get greased. They get paid to attack these people. And who are these people? They're called campesinos. These are farmers, little farmers. And the more we consolidate power in the hands of the very, very few here, the more we're going to start looking like them than the other way around. That's a fact. Jeff in Asheville.
Hey, Marianne has some policy ideas, and in particular for immigration, not just love. But besides that, I was hoping you might help me debunk the fallacy that she's not qualified, or nobody's qualified if they've never been a politician before. So if Tom Hartman, the brilliant Tom Hartman, were in this race, would you agree with me that he's perfectly capable of becoming the president and handling it just fine as... No? What does he lack?
No.
What does he lack?
Charisma.
All right, well,
Tom is my friend. He's my friend, but is he presidential material? I don't think so.
All right. I see your point, and I agree. So you and me pretend it was someone like Tom Hartman, but with a lot of charisma.
I love Tom. Don't get me wrong. I love Tom. Tom is a friend. He's got a very special place in my life, but it ain't, being my president.
I'm saying if it was some hypothetical person.
Listen, I'm not against anybody. Like I said, I would vote for anybody that was on that stage last night, including the sound guy, okay?
That's you and me. I'm talking about getting to the independents. You might not vote for someone besides Trump.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? And that's the conversation I've been trying to have, is leave electability out of it and just go with your gut. Just go with your gut because truly anybody is better than the dimwit. Anybody is better than this lying, thieving, cruel, narcissist. Anybody.
Well, not everyone in America is smart enough to recognize that obvious.
Well, you know what? I don't want to pick, somebody who isn't the best of the lot. But I would vote, if I had to, for anybody that showed up last night and probably for anybody that shows up tonight. It's just, that's just a fact of life. But the purpose of this exercise is to pick the best of the best.
I agree. I think Marianne Williamson is the best.
So that's cool. So, you got a primary, fall in love with her. Go vote for her. Same thing with, there are people that are going to vote for Tulsi Gabbard who, that would be a really tough one for me, I got to say. Of all of them, that'd be the hardest one. But I'm saying to you, you get to fall in love during the primary. But whoever the candidate emerges to be, whoever the nominee is, you better fall in line.
Well, that goes without saying, except for the fact that there's plenty of people who are still going to write in Jill Stein or a gorilla, right?
Yeah, well, you know what? There's no third party here.
Well, you and me know that, but not enough of America has common sense and maturity when it comes to politics. So let's hope we pick the person that's going to...
Well, you're making an argument that doesn't need to be argued because there is no third party candidate at all here, and I doubt very much that anybody would be a third party candidate and not expect that they would be contributing to the reelection of Donald Trump. So they would have a very hard sell to make this time around. So what I'm saying is, go ahead and fall in love. Go ahead.
Well, I'm hoping to use the platform I have for 10 seconds to get you to see if you agree with the notion that you don't have to have political background per se to be an effective president and a great leader.
I disagree with that. I think that you do have to understand where the corruption is. I think you do have to have experienced it. I think you do have to have some executive experience running something. I do think that you need to understand the healthcare system. I think you need to understand the lobby system. I think you need to understand, the donors. I think you need to understand where all the corruption is so you can target it and systematically get rid of the money. That's really the problem.
Hey, 6 years ago, you think Warren was ready to be president, hypothetically?
I would have voted for her, yeah.
and you call her equally qualified 6 years ago without any experience in political office.
She is a person who set up the Consumer Protection Bureau. She is a person who understood bankruptcy. She understood big banking. She understood the liar loans. She understood credit card debt. She understood all that because she was a Harvard-educated bankruptcy attorney.
You brought up.
I don't know why you're fighting so hard for Marianne Williamson. Nobody has seen her yet. She will be on the stage tonight. I'm not telling you not to fall in love with her. But you want to campaign for somebody that we haven't even seen debate yet. That's kind of, And then you say, some people are unsophisticated in politics. Advocating for somebody who you haven't seen hold their own against Biden, against Sanders, against a Kamala Harris who's a prosecutor, against, a former governor, a senator, Kirsten Gillibrand, or another former governor. I mean, or somebody on the intelligence. You haven't even seen her be challenged, and you want to endorse her, and you say, I'm not sophisticated, or my audience isn't. I question your sophistication, sir. I question it.